She pointed her finger forward and said, "Whatever, these are lizard people." The protagonist got angry and said, "Well, they are clearly not horses. Let her get off him already. Why does she become bigger and smaller?" Lucio got off and asked fearfully, "So what are they going to do now? Destroy everything as usual?" Hajun thought about it. He was not tasked with destroying monsters, only to study these. So, he did not have to take a risk and hit them in the forehead, like last time. He remembered how he swung his club and headed towards the wolf. The protagonist frowned and covered in energy thought, "They will just observe the king of the lizard men and finish the first part of the task." He moved behind the monsters and thought, fortunately, they did not notice him thanks to the invisibility skill. Hajun turned around and thought, he hoped that he could easily get to the place where the main monster was. And he could still buy things in the store, right? He might as well spend some money since he was going to be paid 8 billion for this task. The notification said, "A delivery order was received." The protagonist looked at this in confusion and thought, what the hell? Why now? Lucio's eyes widened in fear and screamed, "Hajun, they were noticed." The lizards looked in their direction and hissed loudly. He screamed, "Horror! Why won't this turn off?" Lucio burst into tears and asked to do something about these. Hajun looked at the phone screen and thought, let them wait. He stopped and turned around grinning. Lucio turned around in fear and asked, "Hajun, why did he stop?" He smiled and told them to stay there. He didn't just stop for no reason. The lizard held out his spear and hissed loudly. The protagonist held out his phone in front of him and told them to stop for a minute. He showed the screen of this one and asked, "This order, didn't their boss send it?" The screen showed the system windows. A delivery order had been received. The customer is the King Lizard Man. The lizard warrior stuck out his tongue and hissed in surprise. The monsters gathered in a circle and started talking. Lucio asked, "Did the king order delivery from Hajun?" He replied, "Well, that's what it says on the phone." He grinned widely and thought, it's strange, of course, that the order came from a monster and not from a god or a hero. But what difference does it make to him? He'll kill 2 birds with 1 stone. The protagonist turned around and said, "So there's no time, so let them take him to their boss as soon as possible." The monsters widened their eyes in fear and Hajun asked what they were pointing their fingers at. A huge lizard king appeared behind him. The protagonist turned around and said, "Is this really their king?" An old lizard who was leaning on a wooden stick and shaking stood behind. Hajun smirked and thought, this doesn't look like the incredible description in the report at all. It's embarrassing to even call him a boss monster. The old man lowered his head and began to hiss. The protagonist looked at him and said he felt a little awkward. What was he even telling them? He wondered if there was anything in the store that could help. If this one wanted to order a delivery, he needed to hand over the item and tell him the destination. Lucio looked at him and asked, "Hajun, should she translate this?" He asked, "What, does she understand what he's saying?" Lucio put her hands on her waist and mockingly asked, "Isn't it obvious?" Lucio learned the Naga language a long time ago. Even translating this dialect is a piece of cake. Hajun laughed and said, "Well, of course. She is an elite nymph." The lizard king began to hiss again, and Lucio listened attentively and said, "Wow, yeah." The protagonist looked at her and asked, "What did this one say?" Lucio replied, "A long time ago, a disaster happened in the lizard kingdom. The baby lizard people, the young, and the old, every single one of them were exterminated by a cruel invader." She imagined the image of lizard corpses and a large monster. Hajun pointed at himself and asked, "So they want him to somehow deal with this?" The lizards folded their paws together and began to beg pitifully. The protagonist thought, wow, why are they suddenly so cute? He waved his hand and said, "No, he can't. They can't look at him like that and ask for this. He is not that good." The king began to hiss in response. Lucio translated, "He says if he completes the task, they will give him all the treasures of the kingdom." Hajun looked at her and asked again, "What kind of treasure is there? In any case, they can rely on him." Lucio rolled her eyes in displeasure and said, "He said to follow them into the dungeon." The lizards fell to their knees and began to beg him. The protagonist replied, "Wow, good, they cannot worry about this criminal and just leave everything to him." After a while, Seo Yoon snuck inside the treasury and said, "Let's see. Is there anything useful in there?" She winked and said, "Maybe she will just steal everything?" There are 10 seconds left until the meeting of the thief Hermes and the knight Hermes. At this moment, the protagonist and Lucio approached the treasury and he asked, "Judging by the way they protect the treasures, there must be a lot of them, right?" Lucio screamed, "This looks like the treasury of the gods." The Lizard King opened the doors and a bright light filled the room. Hajuin cried out, "How much?" The whole room was covered in gold and various treasures. The protagonist said, "Yes, there is as much wealth as Ares. And that's only part of it." The Lizard King was telling Lucio the information, and she responded approvingly. She flew up to Hajuin and said, "The king said that these treasures were taken from the people who came there." He asked, "And he decided to brag about it? But anyway, all this will go to them." He wondered, what kind of sound was that? The protagonist looked to the side and saw Seoyun, who had gold bars and coins in her hand. It began to crumble from her hands and she waved her hand and asked, "Hello?" Hajuin grinned and thought, "Well, hello, hello." The lizards got angry and hissed loudly, grabbing their spears. Lucio said, "They say it's a thief, grab her." The protagonist answered discontentedly. There was no need to translate, it was all clear anyway. In an instant, the monsters put Soyen on her knees and she screamed in fear. Hajuin asked how she got there? Lucio said mockingly, "It is very rude to steal treasures from monsters." Seoyun clenched her jaw and thought about what to do. She doesn't know why exactly, but she was told to take the treasures. She can't escape with her astral body. She screamed, "Hubi, he remembers her, right? If he also came there on Hermes' orders, let him explain to them why she is there." The king became angry and hissed. Lucio translated, he asked if this thief is his colleague? The protagonist shouted in displeasure, "Of course not. What kind of Huba is he to her anyway? He graduated from an all-boys middle and high school, he didn't have any senior girls." Lucio looked at him in surprise and asked, "Hajuin, why is he crying?" He turned around and asked angrily, "She says Hermes sent her? She thinks he'll fall for that?" Seoyun's eyes widened in surprise and she thought, "So he doesn't know anything? Why didn't Hermes tell him anything?" She said it, so she had to do it this way. If he helps her there, she'll do whatever he asks. The protagonist asked, "Really everything?" Lucio cried out in displeasure, "Hajuin, you can't trust a thief's words." He put his hand to his chin and looked up thoughtfully. He smiled and said, "Okay." He ordered her to swear on the river Styx. If she does this, he'll help her. Seoyun cried out, "On the river Styx? Hube, does he even understand what that means?" Hajuin curled his lips and said, "If he doesn't want to, as he wants. Either they'll slaughter her there or she'll rot alive in their dungeon." The spear points were getting closer and closer to her neck. Seoyun cried out loudly, "Okay, she'll swear. If he saves her from the lizard people, she, Choi Seoyun, swears by the river Styx that she will definitely repay Hubei for this by fulfilling one of his requests." The protagonist turned around and said, "Okay. Lucio, let him explain everything to them." She replied puzzledly, she was not sure if she should. The lizards let go of Seoyun, and she exhaled and said, "It hasn't even been a year." "Thank you, Hubei." Hajuin discontentedly ordered her to stop calling him that. Whatever the case, he remembered her promise. Seoyun smiled and asked, "So what do you want, little pervert?" The protagonist screamed, what did she imagine there? Suddenly, a system window appeared above him. He needed to fulfill the prophecy of salvation that was passed down from generation to generation of lizard people and destroy the cruel invader. Time limit 3 hours. Tips for delivery, royal treasures. The protagonist thought fearfully, only 3 hours? How could they give him so little time to kill the monster? He rushed to run away and shouted, "Lucio, let her move her wings, they need to catch the monster faster." She clenched her fist and asked, "Will he not even look at the promised reward?" He answered, he said, "There is no time." Seoyun stretched out her hand and told him to stop. She asked why he was pretending that they did not know each other. The Lizard King did not answer. He looked at her with embarrassment, and she was scared. Hajuin at this time was already racing on his motorcycle, smiling widely. The system window reported that there were 30 kilometers to the destination. He clenched his jaw and thought, there is still so much to go. Although he will drive at full speed, he will get to the destination without problems. But there, at the place, will he be able to defeat a monster that nothing is known about in the remaining time? Lucio pressed herself closer to him and shouted, "Too fast." The protagonist ordered her to hold on, they were in a hurry. Seoyun suddenly appeared in front of him and asked with a laugh, "Hubei, it seems like things aren't going so smoothly?" Hajuin screamed in fear, "Oh my god, where did she come from?" He suddenly stopped and asked what she needed. Let her take what she needed and get out of there. Seoyun winked and asked, "Hey, how could she just leave like that?" He saved her. She thought she could help solve her Hubei's problem. He looked at her and replied, he wasn't going to release her from her debt, so let her not do anything stupid and leave, okay? Lucio clenched her fist and screamed. They said, let her leave. Seo Yun chuckled and asked if they could say the same thing after listening to her. That monster they were about to kill was actually a red dragon. Hajun turned around and asked what she said. He imagined the image of the monster and thought, if this is the red dragon that Park Seongjin asked him to study, this is a monster of the highest level. That's why he sent him to study the lizard people and the red dragon? He froze and continued to think, staring at one point. Seo Yun thought, she really doesn't want to run into a monster like the red dragon. But she will only get the treasures of the lizard people if she wins their trust by completing the task. She said she can show a shortcut to the red dragon. And she will help catch it. Hajun asked, how can she help if she only knows how to steal? Seo Yun smiled and replied, Hubei is cute, he only sees the tip of the iceberg. Helping is not only possible in battle. He will see. Thieves have their own tricks. She flashed her eyes and smiled. After a while, they made their way into the monster's lair, where everything around was red. Seo Yun said, we have arrived. The dragon, red, is sleeping. It sat and snored loudly. The protagonist replied, he is not blind and snores loudly. Lucio asked in surprise, Hajun, can they really catch it? The protagonist activated the protective armor and replied, we will have to attack. The system window reported, activating the invisibility helmet. Moto suit power mode. Super jump. A bright energy glow went after the protagonist. He thought, this dragon is very strong. It woke up and roared loudly. Hajun froze near it and thought, well, here we go. He dealt a strong blow and the dragon roared loudly, illuminating everything around with a bright light. Seo Yun covered her face with her hands and screamed in resistance. She said, no way. How did he even do it? Seo Yun remembered the projection of Hermes and thought, since Hermes chose her? She has overcome so many trials that other hunters never dreamed of. But what she sees now? She stared at the protagonist who continued to strike the monster. Seo Yun thought, it's just unbelievable. The huge dragon fell to the ground, raising dust and shaking the ground. Seo Yun clenched her jaws and thought, the red dragon, the association assigned this monster at least the 7th difficulty level. In all the dungeons and gates that people managed to clear so far. It roared loudly and bent over its knees. Seo Yun thought, the number of appearances of such dangerous monsters can be counted on the fingers of one hand. And if he is the same messenger of Hermes as she is, then he definitely could not become so strong so quickly. Nowadays, to get to such a level, you need to work as a hunter. At least 15 years. She imagined the images of some of the best hunters, especially Seongjin. Seo Yun thought, and even if you look at them from the perspective of mythology, everyone has more than one patron deity. But this guy in front of her hasn't worked for even a year, and he's already on the same level as her, or even better than her. And there's something weird about this red dragon. The monster started waving its head and roaring loudly. Seo Yun thought, even though Hube was right in front of the dragon, it was as if the monster didn't see him at all. She widened her eyes in surprise and wondered, was that an invisibility helmet? The monster continued to roar loudly and opened its huge mouth. It swung its paw and screamed loudly. The monster rose and struck the protagonist, but he jumped back and thought, the dragon doesn't know where he is, so he decided to destroy everything around him? He's a monster after all. Hajun clenched his fist and threw himself down, screaming, so, this one will definitely like this. He struck a strong energy blow, and the monster howled loudly. A bright glow spread around, frying the ground. The dragon stood in the center of the funnel, and the protagonist was already moving to strike again. He exhaled and said, how this got on his nerves. The dragon's bright eyes lit up again, and it began to rise. Hajun said, this skin is tough. The system window reported the remaining time to use the enhancement, 1 minute and 32 seconds. The protagonist frowned and thought, damn, there is almost no time left. Although the invisibility helmet hides him, without the power of the suit, he will not be able to fight this creature. He just has to deal with it in the remaining time. Hajun rushed forward and used the summon club. He swung it and ordered it to die already. The dragon's eyes flashed, and the protagonist swung it. The dragon dodged and he thought in surprise, did it dodge? But the helmet? Maybe it's all because of this club? Invisibility does not apply to this. The dragon swung its huge clawed paw and roared loudly. The protagonist looked at this in confusion. The monster clenched its fist and struck Hajuin, causing a bright explosion. Seoyun screamed, "This idiot! Why is he stuck in one place?" She took out a glass vessel and thought, then he wouldn't be able to avoid this attack. She said, "It's time to stop being so overconfident." Lucio screamed, "Stupid girl." Seoyun looked at her with a puzzled expression, and Lucio said with displeasure, "Instead of ruining everything, let her just stand aside and watch." Seoyun asked in surprise, "How long has she been there?" Lucio replied, "Hajuin will definitely be fine, there's no need to worry. He's been in difficult situations many times, but he always got through it." She began to recall all his battles and deeds. Lucio screamed, and in the end, he received recognition from many gods and heroes. So there's no way he'll lose to that monster. Seoyun frowned and asked, "Hey, let her ask, but that attack wasn't that strong after all?" She knows he's strong, but if she keeps just watching. She widened her eyes in confusion and looked at Lucio, who began to shake. Seoyun wondered, is this little girl shaking? Of course, she raised her voice a little, but what can she do if she is so worried? It will be good if she intervenes and helps him. Seoyun pulled the elixir towards her, when suddenly a joyful cry was heard. She looked towards the dragon, on whose belly the protagonist was hanging and screaming. He clung to the belly of this one. Seoyun wondered in surprise. He climbed onto the dragon's belly? She asked how and why. Lucio shouted joyfully, "Hajuin!" She knew he could do it. The system window reported, the remaining time to use the boost, 57 seconds. Hajuin screamed, horror, he was able to climb it, but he has no time left at all. Suddenly, he looked up in surprise and thought, what is this? There were burning stones on the dragon's neck, and the protagonist thought, what are these strange scales on the neck of this one? Lucio clenched her fists and shouted, "Hey, let him attack this, Hajuin." He thought, attack? That's right, that's the weak point of it. The protagonist said, "Open a shop." The system window reported, shop, a golden apple costs 1,000 points, a lead arrow costs 10,000 points, and a golden arrow costs 50,000 points. He can definitely defeat it with this. Hajuin looked down and shouted, "Lucio! This monster is considered a dragon, right?" She asked in confusion, "Why is he even asking that?" He shouted, "Hurry up, there's no time." Lucio closed her eyes and replied, "Lucio herself doesn't know, she's never looked into such details. But it seems to be a kind of dinosaur-like dragon." The protagonist pointed his finger at the system window and asked, "Okay, but it's still a dragon, right?" The system window reported, the remaining points, 1,382,000. Hajuin pointed his finger at it and thought, that's enough. The system reported that he had 1,372,000 points left. Li Hajuin selected the item and thought that this would be enough. And a large and glowing sword appeared in his hand. Many lightning bolts pierced the weapon in him. The system reported that the purchase of a magic sword was complete. He was still hanging on the monster's chest, and his sword was incredibly brightly shining. Choi Seoyun looked at it in shock and said that this could not be. How did this guy get the legendary Gram sword from Norse mythology? Now Li Hajuin, satisfied, raised the sword high and confidently looked at the monster's weak point. This sword would be enough to slay the dragon in its weak point. He swung the bright sword and shouted for the monster to die. At the same moment, the monster's eye began to sparkle, and its whole body was covered in fire. Li Hajuin looked at it in surprise as the fire surrounded him. The monster roared loudly as the fire grew bigger. The protagonist couldn't believe that the dragon had caught fire. He started to fall and was very unhappy. Where did the monster hide such a technique? Having fallen to the ground, he looked at the dragon in fear, which was enveloped in streams of flame. Now he couldn't even get close to the monster. Lucio was hiding in the bushes and screamed that it was too dangerous. Choi Seoyun started to run towards him. She was worried because this was the second phase of the dragon. Li Hajuin alone wouldn't win. She screamed that they needed to join forces, and he told her not to come near him. She couldn't hide from the monster. But she replied with a grin that she had already told him about the special methods of thieves, right? She swung the flask to throw it, and said that she would show him everything now. The ice potion of Demeter's tears quickly flew straight at the monster, and when the flask broke, a bright flash of ice appeared. The monster screamed, and the system reported that the freezing effect was applied. The monster's entire body was covered in ice, and it could no longer perform active actions. Choi Seoyun proudly asked, "Did Li Hajuin like her ability?" "Demeter's tears can freeze anything. He said that she could have thrown this potion at the very beginning. But she called him a fool. How could he not realize that she was waiting for the second phase? In fact, he was the only one running around without a plan. But Li Hajuan asked, wouldn't it be better if she used the potion from the beginning? While they were arguing, the dragon continued to heat up. Then Lucio shouted that they were too early to let their guard down. The ice was melting. Almost immediately, the monster roared loudly as the ice shattered into many small fragments. It was just terrible that the monster was released. Choi Seoyun was shocked and screamed that it couldn't be. Demeter's ice couldn't be broken just like that. But the protagonist realized that although the potion could freeze anything, it didn't say that ice couldn't be broken. She replied that he was right. The dragon began to breathe powerful flames again, and the air around him seemed to be on fire. Li Hajuan asked, what else can thieves do? He began to worry when he was surrounded by fire. The system said that the enhancement would last for another 20 seconds. Now he really had almost no time left for the enhancement to work. Choi Seoyun was also worried. She told him to distract the monster while she thought. She took out another flask. She only had one Demeter remedy left. She would have to take a risk. She threw the glowing flask. The plant potion shattered. A large plant appeared from the bright flash on the dragon. The monster screamed as vines enveloped his entire body. The potion calls upon the powers of Demeter's nature to bind the target. She said it was time to act, so he ran forward, saying he understood. His body was shining brightly with lightning, and the sword was flying straight to the weak point, after which he swung the magic blade. Deliveryman Li Hajuan dealt an incredibly powerful blow. The invulnerable boss of the 7th level was divided in half. And the protagonist said contentedly that he had won. The dragon attack was complete. In the guild building, Yun Won was giving a report to Ha Doyan. He said that in Goziang, Kamwon province, there is a wyvern gorge, after exploring which they found out that neither this place nor the boss monster are dangerous. Park Seongjin replied that it was a good job. He worked hard this time too. He can leave work early, have a good rest. But the guy said that he heard about it in the elevator. So that rumor is true? Park Seongjin did not understand what he was talking about. Then Ha Doan said that this was the bomb that the association planted for them. Park Seongjin rubbed his forehead in irritation and said that this lizard dungeon was really terrible. He would soon go crazy because of it. He frowned, thinking that everything was fine until he was contacted and told that the quest was completed in less than a day. He was shocked and asked what happened. Was the research already completed? Li Hajuan was breathing heavily from fatigue and said that he was not talking about the research, but about the red dragon. He accidentally killed the monster. He asked, his mission is considered complete, right? But Park Seongjin couldn't believe it. At first he thought it was a joke. But after the guild members went to check his words, they confirmed that it was true. They were also shocked. The guild leader never imagined that this monster could be defeated. How should he report this to the association? Of course, he was glad that Li Hajuan was able to kill the monster that could cause a disaster in the future. But the problem is that this monster is too strong to handle. Li Hajuan strictly said to keep his identity a secret. But the association will definitely suspect that they entrusted the killing of a level 7 monster to an outsider. Who in this world could kill such a monster? And Ha Doyan admired the protagonist. He killed those giants. Now the red dragon. Shouldn't they all be demoted? Park Seongjin asked. So Ha Doyan doesn't mind being demoted to a rank? The guy became worried and laughed, saying that this is too much. He also worked hard, so he can keep his rank, right? But the guild leader refused him. He was busy looking at his phone and thinking about the scary lizard boss. Anyway, if the red dragon is defeated, the research on lizard monsters continues? In the dungeon with the beautiful lizard castle, everything was calm, although the lizards ran into the hall, in a hurry. They fell on their knees in front of Li Hajuan and looked at him with gratitude and admiration. Lucio translated their words. They said that they were very grateful for protecting their kingdom. The protagonist awkwardly said that this was too much. He had not done anything serious. He knelt down in front of the lizard, taking his hands. He said that his client could stand up. He was the king. He did not need to be treated like that. The king was delighted with him, even cried, and Li Hajuan decided to interrupt this moment. He asked for his reward with a creepy smile, which scared the king, who did not understand anything. But soon a beautiful chest was brought out to the protagonist, and when it was opened, Lucio and Li Hajuan were surprised by the bright light. He looked inside and awkwardly asked what it was. A purse in such a chest? The protagonist looked into the bag with disappointment, and the lizard asked if he liked the gift. Li Hajuan indignantly pulled the lizard king by the mustache, asked how he could like such a gift. For this they made him go through such trials? But Lucio said admiringly that this was not an ordinary wallet, but he still did not understand and said that he did not need even a designer wallet. But Lucio said that this wallet can store large and heavy things. It is a magic wallet. They stayed in the castle until the next day. The king and other lizards came out to see them off, wishing the hero a good journey. Lucio also said goodbye to them. In the morning, Park Seonjun called the protagonist. He asked if Lee Hajuin was busy. He said that the gate that appeared in Nansan disappeared. Now they were already walking on the way back. While he was thinking, perhaps the gate was the salvation for the lizard people from the destruction of their kingdom. Now that peace reigned there, they no longer have a reason to move anywhere. Moreover, if there is a way to get rid of monsters without killing them, why should people fight them? He sighed sadly, thinking that it would be nice if all the problems in the world were solved peacefully. But everything was too complicated. His head hurt just thinking about it. Choi Soo-hyun said that she congratulated him. He got a good prize yesterday. He replied that it seemed so, and was Choi Soo-hyun herself okay? She spent her expensive potions and got nothing in return. However, Choi Soo-hyun proudly said that she never worked at a loss and showed him a sparkling bracelet. Lee Hajuin recognized the bell on her wrist and was surprised. The girl was enveloped in a bright aura, after which she flew high into the air, surrounded by streams of mana. She said that it was fun with him. Thanks to him, she was able to get what she owed. Huge rings of mana appeared in the sky, and the girl quickly flew away, saying that they would meet again if they were lucky. Lee Hajuin said with displeasure that she really couldn't control herself. Lucio didn't lose anything, did he? But then he said that it wasn't that important, because it was time for them to go. Lucio was already hoping that they were going home. But he replied that it wasn't quite like that. He wanted to go get the money first, after which Lee Hajuin called the guild leader. Soon, 8 billion won was deposited into his account, and the protagonist himself was at home. He received a letter on his phone, which said that everything he said was confirmed. The remaining amount was transferred to the specified account. After processing the Red Dragon's corpse, the association will transfer part of the proceeds to him. He was surprised that the corpse also costs money. All this time he went into dungeons without a hunter's license, and now he found out that he could get extra money for monster carcasses. He happily cooked himself food, but then asked, now he can't just walk past monsters like that, right? He can't just refuse the profit from selling the byproducts of killing a monster. Sleepy Lucio came out and yawned, asking, what good happened so early in the morning? He turned around, surprised at such an early awakening, and said that nothing happened. She needed to eat breakfast. She recognized the aroma of fried chicken and clenched her fists insistently. Lee Hajuin told her not to act like she had never eaten this before. They had already ordered it yesterday. Lucio took a piece and was eager to take a bite, but she screamed that it was too hot. He handed her a drink and said that the chicken was steaming. Of course it would be hot, she needed to wash it down. Lucio continued eating and said that she almost died, and Lee Hajuin looked at her plate, telling her not to eat so quickly. He was surprised at her monster appearance while eating and asked, did she die of hunger in her past life? Then he also ate a piece and said that it was really very delicious. They say that expensive fried chicken is delicious even when it's cold. He cried with pleasure. The reheated chicken tasted the same as yesterday. He remembered passing by a cafe and looking sadly from the street. Recently he could only afford 2 portions because he didn't have enough money. Now he was enjoying the taste of the food, the box of which was shining. He can't believe that he is now buying chicken for 30,000 won. He takes as much as he wants. Money is very good. Lucio asked in surprise, is he crying? Is it because Lucio didn't ask permission and ate 2 legs? She showed him the bone and said there is still half left. He can eat it. He got angry, saying that she is tired of living, but he was interrupted by the notification of a delivery order. Lee Hajuin began to think about a new order. Lucio ate 2 pieces at once and asked, are they really going right now? But he said that it was not so. Before he would have immediately stopped eating and went to work, afraid that the order would get lost. But now he ate another piece and said that they would eat and not rush, and then go. Now that he had 10 billion won in his account, if he missed a couple of orders, nothing would change. At this time, Olympus was burning with fire and black smoke, beautiful buildings were collapsing, and many warriors were killed and bloodied. A huge fire engulfed the island of Crete, destroying everything, but there were still warriors ready to defend the city. The boy shouted for everyone to stop the intruder. They cannot let him in. An army of fighters was attacking a huge monster whose eyes sparkled through the smoke. The army general came to the ruler and said that all the warriors were trying hard to stop the attack. But it seems that this is not enough to stop this monster. The ruler needs to run as far away from the palace as possible before the monster breaks in. The king asked excitedly, "Where are the heroes?" But the general replied that he had already sent messages to everyone he could, but they would not arrive earlier than 3 days. The king was indignant. Why so long? The heroes were needed now. Should they just wait for their death? Suddenly the whole castle began to shake, stones fell, and the fortress wall exploded, after which the general began to panic. A monster's paw appeared, and then the entire giant minotaur came out of the smoke. The king and the general were terrified. They were overcome with despair, after which the king turned to Poseidon. The giant minotaur screamed loudly and began to wave his weapon, breaking everything, while the king did not understand why the god left their island. Li Hajuan appeared near the house of Hephaestus, but was surprised since no one was home. Lucio asked, maybe they left because too much time had passed? But then he asked, maybe because she continued to heat up more and more chicken in the air fryer? Lucio said indignantly that they couldn't just leave the chicken like that, and Li Hajuan told her not to make excuses. He looked at the phone. Judging by how many times the delivery request was sent, it was urgent. Were they tired of waiting and left? Lucio turned around and was very surprised at what she saw. She called Li Hajuan, who was also surprised. They saw a sad and gloomy Hephaestus, who asked if Li Hajuan had finally arrived. The protagonist began to worry. What was going on? Why was there such bad energy coming from him? He asked if Hephaestus had ordered delivery, and he thought that the god was probably angry that they arrived late. He replied that he called the protagonist because of the urgency of the matter. This task might be too difficult for him. He began to enter the house and told them to follow him. They would better discuss all the details inside. Li Hajuan was really worried and did not understand anything, but he agreed. The 3 of them sat at the table, and Hephaestus did not know how to start a conversation. The protagonist tried to be cheerful and asked where all the tension between them came from. Hephaestus can just say what he thinks is necessary. He will take it upon himself and do everything. Li Hajuan remembered the same excitement and tension, but then he was excited during his acquaintance with Chiron, while trying to hide it. And because of his excitement, the protagonist also becomes uncomfortable. Soon Hephaestus asked, Li Hajuan remembers what they talked about with Freya when he returned from Helheim? He remembered that in fact the god advised to forget about that conversation, and Hephaestus agreed. The protagonist remembered that they clearly said something about the split of the earth. He even remembers everything. It said there, the place where the earth split into 7 parts, and everything around is burning with blue flames. But they themselves told him to forget about it, so why remind him? Hephaestus said that he would like to deal with this problem only with the powers of the gods, but the situation turned out to be too serious. He thought about the monster that no one could defeat yet, and then said, it seems they have reached a point where they are no longer able to do anything. The meeting was the result of a meeting of the 12 gods who had gathered to discuss the recent problem of the emerging tentacles. They had taken root not only in the world of the gods of Greece and Scandinavia, but also in the world of humans. The creature seemed to be enveloping the planet with its tentacles and watching closely. It was unknown whether the seeds of this creature fell on the earth from above. Even the gods could not do anything about what had already grown into the ground. There was a principle of causality. Between the 2 worlds there seemed to be an insurmountable obstacle. A deity should not interfere with earthly affairs for trifles. Hephaestus said, unfortunately, they could not move at will. At best, the seeds that had already been sown would simply sprout. From the sad thoughts of the god, Li Hajuan, who did not understand anything, called out. He said he was sorry, but what the god just said was unclear. Who were they? What kind of seeds? Hephaestus became nervous, asking, Li Hajuan really didn't know this? He tried to say something, but suddenly they seemed to be deafened. Then the protagonist asked what the god just said. Lucio said excitedly. It was as if she was thrown out of reality for a moment. She could not hear anything at all. Then Hephaestus frowned again, as he thought, they are not supposed to know. Apparently, in the past, the gods joined forces to seal the knowledge of their very existence. They created a huge magic circle that released a lot of energy. Now even their name is forbidden to reveal. Hephaestus immediately returned to his usual state and said, whatever the case, they do not need to rush and find out the details. What he is about to ask him about now may be somehow related to them. In fact, offerings from the island of Crete were supposed to arrive today, but they still have not received anything. Fortunately, they definitely could not forget about it because of the meeting with their uncle. But if he found out about it, he would be very angry. Hephaestus thought that he should find out what happened before his uncle found out. Of course he would pay them well. Li Hajuan still didn't understand much and shrugged. saying that it didn't seem like such a serious problem. Maybe the offerings were delayed for some reason. Was it really that urgent? Lucio frowned and said that in other places it might not be noticed, but not when the problem was with the Minotaur. He asked, but how could he know about it? Lucio remembered the beautiful bull and the king of Crete, asking, wasn't this a famous story? The story of the queen who encroached on Poseidon's offering, which made the god very angry. Li Haojuan began to guess what the nymph was talking about, then Lucio said that it was true. It was a story about a labyrinth, once entered, you can never get out, and about the monster Minotaur. There was a bright sunset over the sea, and a motorcycle was moving quickly across the water. Lucio held onto it, and asked if they were sure they were going in the right direction. He became worried and thought about it, saying that he was definitely following the navigator. The system reported that the remaining time of the helmet modification, C, was 30 seconds. Then he remembered that moving across the sea in an invisible helmet has a time limit. Suddenly, an island became visible in front of them. Li Haojuan shouted that they finally found a place to stop. Lucio said that they were lucky. When they went ashore, he tiredly dropped his hands, because he was afraid that they would drown. Lucio displeasedly noted that he never prepared thoroughly. What if he forgot about the time limit? The protagonist shouted that it would be much more convenient if Hephaestus immediately sent them to their destination. Lucio answered with a businesslike look that Mr. Hephaestus can only move them to places that are associated with his constellation. He anxiously began to look for something in the store. Because he can't even swim, maybe he needs to buy something for this. As soon as he opened the store, the system offered the Theseus boat for 30 million points, Argo for 50 million and Noah's Ark for 100 million. He thought that it was just robbing people, not the prices. Lucio ran up and frowned. What should they do now? He said that everything was obvious, they would have to sell something. But first, he suggested looking around the area, after which he took out a magic bag. He knew that something like this would definitely happen, so he took with him the gift he received from the Lizard King. He took out a pair of binoculars and happily said, despite the fact that he put everything he needed in there was still a lot of space. It was clearly worth the effort he put in to destroy the red dragon. He began to look through the binoculars and hoped to see something from such a distance. A beautiful building appeared in his binoculars, which was engulfed in flames, and smoke was flying in the sky. He asked what it was. It seemed like there was a place nearby where people lived. They just needed to go there and find out how to get to the island of Crete. Suddenly, he saw the huge face of a warrior who shouted, "What are they doing there?" It turned out that there were a lot of soldiers who were unhappy with the invasion of their lands. Li Haojuan became worried, realizing that they were in trouble. He raised his hands up while they pointed a gun at him. The protagonist asked them to calm down. He was just looking for a boat that would take him to the island of Crete. The warriors were surprised, and the guy shouted, "Does he really not know about what happened there?" However, the second warrior asked him to calm down, and asked Li Haojuan if he could tell him more. Li Haojuan even became worried, thinking who this guy was. The man stepped forward and said that he just wanted to know who their guests were. All the warriors were confused. Lucio recognized him and said that this was Mr. Theseus. Li Haojuan was also shocked. He recognized him. Lucio also said with admiration that he was the famous hero who defeated the Minotaur. Theseus, who fought with the fierce Minotaur, still remembered that terrible monster. He is a legendary hero who defeated the Minotaur and got out of its labyrinth. He was the king of Athens who accomplished many feats, so he earned great respect among the gods and people. Theseus asked, judging by the guy's strange outfit, is he the same delivery man of the gods that the king had heard so much about? The protagonist was surprised that he was already known. Theseus said, of course he knows him. The guy is wearing such an interesting outfit that is rarely seen. He is the aspiring hero that the captain was talking about. Li Haojuan continued to not understand anything. Then Lucio realized that he was talking about Jason from the Argos ship. Sometimes the protagonist remembered the one who instructed him to kill the sirens. He remembered Jason's happy and joyful face. Although the protagonist was almost drowned, thanks to this task he received a lot of money. He asked, but why did Theseus call him a novice hero? The king asked in surprise. Doesn't he know about his reputation? He exterminated the sirens in their lair, even defeated the Hydra to heal Chiron's leg. In addition, Theseus heard that he got to Heim at the request of the Scandinavian gods. Li Haojuan has already become famous. The king thinks there is no one who has not heard of his achievements. The protagonist rubbed his nose and laughed sarcastically, but contentedly, saying that he has done a lot. The nymph was inspired and asked, maybe they say something about Lucio? Theseus laughed and said that he did not even remember anything like that. Although he heard something about how the hero was accompanied by a nymph. She fell to her knees in sadness and disappointment, asking if she was just an escort for everyone. Lee Hajuin laughed and asked her to cheer up. Theseus said that if Lee Hajuin was planning to go to Crete, he should read something. He looked at the paper in the king's hand in surprise and asked what it was. He showed the document to Lucio and asked what it said. She was surprised and said that it was a warning that the monster from the terrible labyrinth on the island of Crete had been reborn. The protagonist was shocked and asked if Mr. Theseus hadn't defeated the Minotaur. But the hero replied that he did not kill the monster, but locked it up. He does not know why, but it seems that the Minotaur was released. So tomorrow morning he was going to go again and catch the monster, and the god's delivery man would go with him? Lee Hajuin became worried. He hoped that at least this time he wouldn't have to fight. However, he replied that he was going to. He had already resigned himself to the fact that everything hadn't gone according to plan. Everything in the palace was shaking and collapsing. A giant minotaur grabbed the king and then walked down the corridor with heavy steps. His body was glowing terribly, and his roar and breathing were terrible. The sun rose over the beautiful building. Lee Hajuin began to wake Lucio, but she could not wake up and asked for 5 more minutes, just 5 minutes. He said discontentedly that there would be number 5 minutes, the boat would soon arrive, so it was time for her to stop sleeping and wake up. She rubbed her eyes and asked if sailors really didn't sleep when it was so dark outside. He replied that the captain decided when they sailed, she had been capricious enough, she needed to wash up and go get ready. Lucio answered discontentedly that she had already understood him. Lee Hajuin opened the window and asked how she managed to become lazier every day. I wonder if Theseus managed to find them worthy companions? At night, he said that the boat would leave at dawn, so they should go and get a good night's sleep. He would try to gather a team. He replied that he understood, but he was curious about something. Hadn't Theseus defeated the Minotaur in the past? He frowned and said that he had, but he had been helped by the princess of the island of Crete, Ariadne. The Minotaur, his appearance is heavenly punishment for trying to deceive the gods. It is the shame of the royal family of the island of Crete, the fruit of a forbidden relationship, so vicious and disgusting that it is difficult even to talk about it. According to legend, the monster should be dead, so why did it return and terrorize the island again? Theseus said that this is precisely why he is in a hurry to start the journey. If possible, he would like to kill the monster with his own hands. Lee Hajuin asked, so there is no need to gather a whole group? Theseus said that he thought the same, and then heard it from the messenger of Hercules. In the morning, the main character continued to ponder what Theseus had heard. Perhaps it was somehow connected with what Hephaestus was trying to say. In the imagination of the alarmed Lee Hajuin, there was a huge monster, something that split into 7 parts and sowed seeds everywhere. Then he ruffled his hair, irritably saying how tired he was of fighting monsters. He himself did not know what stupidity he had gotten himself into. Soon Lucio ran to him and said that she had already washed her face. Cold water worked wonders in the morning. He even began to get irritated by such carelessness. A huge, beautiful ship sailed to the city walls. Soldiers were loading many boxes there. Theseus himself was helping them. And soon Lee Hajuin called him. The hero was surprised that they came, since he wanted to go after them himself. Lucio screamed that Lee Hajuin overslept, and he asked if she was really tired of living. Theseus said that they were leaving soon, so they should go on board and wait there. They would be shown where the cabin was. They saluted the captain and said that they were following his orders. They came closer. Lee Hajuin was surprised. The boat looked huge from afar, and up close it was a real giant. Lucio said that she would also be traveling on the hero's boat for the first time. The main character thought, but they were both on Argo, and this ship looks like a ship from one anime. With a creepy grin, someone laughed and asked, "Isn't it obvious who this boat belongs to?" He was surprised by what he heard, and Lucio said with excitement that she was silent. He awkwardly rubbed his cheek. It seemed to him that the voice was high-pitched. He thought it was a nymph. Someone behind said that he was there, and then asked, "Who is this nymph from the ditch with her master? Are they even going crazy over such a boat?" Lee Hajuin was very surprised to see that small creature. In front of him was another nymph who was shining brightly. He said that it was just shameful, and then smirked and laughed at them. The protagonist did not understand what kind of analog of Lucio was this. But the nymph happily said that she and Luber had not seen each other for a long time. Lee Hajuin was surprised that they knew each other, and the nymph was already squeezing Luber. She heard that the hero called him, so it was Teamiai. How wonderful! Luber pushed her away with displeasure and asked her not to act like a country bumpkin. The protagonist was very surprised, not counting Lucio. This is the first time he sees a nymph. It seems they are all the same. He said, Lucio said that for a nymph she is quite tall. It turns out that was a lie. They heard heavy footsteps. Theseus asked what Luber was doing there. He said displeasedly and sternly, it seems he told him to take the guests to their cabin. Luber began to panic and stutter. He couldn't answer his master. Then Li Hajuin raised his hands and awkwardly said to Mr. Theseus that everything was fine. The two seemed to know each other, so he let them chat. Theseus laughed and said if so, he apologized to Luber. Anyway, they were leaving soon, so they needed to settle in quickly. The protagonist asked if he could ask Luber to do it now. He continued to cry a little and told them to follow him. Inside the ship, everything was just incredible. They entered one of the rooms. Luber said that they could settle in the cabin. The protagonist was surprised and asked if this was a really nice place, isn't it? Lucio replied that the cabin was even better than the room they spent the night and last night. Luber said he completely forgot to thank them for protecting him in front of Mr. Theseus. But Li Hajuin replied that everything was fine. For him, Lucio was like a younger brother. She asked discontentedly, why are her friends like younger brothers to him? Li Hajuin said angrily, Luber can't be an older brother. Then she asked, this is his first time seeing Luber. Doesn't he think it's too much to call the first person he meets a younger brother? Luber looked at them in confusion, and then sadly began to fly away, saying that Lucio really met a good hero. Li Hajuin asked what happened. Maybe Theseus treats the nymph badly? Lucio said that this can't be. She heard that Mr. Theseus is kind to everyone. In general, the nymphs, are just helpers, so Li Hajuin is very unusual. The dissatisfied guy said then she should help properly. Of course, the gods and heroes he met treated the nymph like a thing. And Greek myths came to people from the times when slavery was the norm. It is difficult for modern people to understand this. They looked at the waves while the ships sailed on the dark sea. Theseus frowned and said, looking at the mountain, here they are back to the terrible labyrinth. Their ships sailed and stopped at the pier, and smoke was visible in the distance. They got off the ship, and then looked at the city, which was almost completely destroyed. Everything around was burning. The protagonist was horrified by such a sight, asking, is this the island of Crete? Lucio was in his arms. She said that there were solid ruins ahead. The protagonist could not stop being horrified by the sight of corpses and the city. People there died a terrible death. What happened? Theseus said that the Minotaur did all this. They must find survivors as soon as possible. Then Luber pointed ahead and said there, that building is intact, and Theseus was not even surprised, saying that it was the temple of Poseidon. They came to a huge and beautiful building with a statue of the god. It seems that the Minotaur decided not to touch this place and the statue of Poseidon. It seems so if the Minotaur destroyed the temple, it would not end with a simple punishment. They walked along the bloody floor straight to the huge gates. Theseus realized that the bloody footprints ended in front of these doors. He thought that the Minotaur was inside and opened the gates, and inside he saw a beautiful hall. Inside there were only frightened people. The boy screamed to save them. Although the hero was disappointed, he was glad that there were survivors. The people recognized him and were inspired. The girl said, this is Mr. Theseus. They are saved, they will live. He ordered to take the survivors to the ship, after which everyone began to go, helping the wounded and the elderly. The men carried the women in their arms. Li Hajuin said, good that the people are safe, and Theseus said that there are too few of them. Besides, King Minos is not there. A warrior came up to Theseus from behind and asked for forgiveness. He asked what happened. Then the man answered that the king was carried away by a monster. Li Hajuin asked if he knew where exactly the monster had gone, and the man replied that Minos was in that terrible labyrinth from which there was no escape. Theseus began to panic. It was terrible. He did not think that he would have to go there again. He imagined a huge cave and a monster holding the king. If they did not hurry, a tragedy would happen. They arrived and Li Hajuin looked up in surprise. They were standing in front of the huge and beautiful gates of the labyrinth. Theseus clenched his teeth until they creaked. He did not think that this creature was hiding there again. If he had known this, they would not have had to save so many people. The Labyrinth of Crete is a mythical labyrinth built by Daedalus by order of King Minos. They say that no one who entered the labyrinth could come out. Warriors fell to the floor from helplessness and cried, so the place is called the labyrinth that devours people. Li Hajuin looked at the gate and wondered what he was doing there, but said that the labyrinth was simply huge. He just had to find out why no offerings had come from the island. He looked at his phone with concern and thought that he had already completed his task. However, the system informed him that he needed to follow Theseus and find out the truth. Lee Hajuan thought with displeasure and shock, why should he investigate? Theseus said that before they entered, they needed to tie this to the pole. He had a ball of thread in his hand. Lee Hajuan was surprised and asked what exactly they needed to tie. Theseus said that the knot needed to be tied tightly so that nothing would come undone. Then the protagonist remembered that he had heard about this before. So on the way back, they would need to follow this thread? The protagonist replied that this was exactly it, otherwise they would wander through this labyrinth for the rest of their lives. He thought about it, and remembered Ariadne. She was the princess of the island of Crete, the ugly daughter of King Minos, who was once his lover. Although it is said that she left Theseus to marry the god Dionysus, he did not forget the way to escape the labyrinth that she taught him. Now he looks at the ball of thread left by Ariadne. He understands that he will have to go through those corridors again. There was a creepy and dark atmosphere in the huge labyrinth. The heroes walked with torches and threads tied to their belts. Lucio was flying nearby. She rubbed her hands and said that it was too creepy there. Lee Hajuan agreed with her. The atmosphere can be felt even by bones. At this time, Theseus looked ahead and frowned, and the protagonist asked why they suddenly stopped. But Theseus realized that something abnormal was happening. Lee Hajuan was worried and did not understand anything. Theseus answered, he did not remember it being so stuffy in the labyrinth. What happened? Lucio frowned and said that she felt a strange smell. It was more viscous than the smell of blood. But then she was horrified, because she remembered that she had already felt it. Then a slimy and creepy monster greeted her from the ceiling, and Lucio screamed loudly. And the indignant protagonist asked why she was scaring him so much? But then he looked up and became nervous. There was a monster with creepy eyes and a mouth spreading all over the ceiling. Lee Hajuan began to panic. He recognized this creature. It was exactly the same monster with tentacles that they saw at the gate in Houndy and in the place where they met Hercules. The monster screamed angrily and began to lower its tentacles to the ground. The presence of a monster in the labyrinth is definitely related to what Mr. Hephaestus said. Theseus frowned and asked what kind of creature it was, since when did other monsters live in the labyrinth? His eyes began to shine. He decided that he must destroy this creature. He pushed off and jumped high up, then began to chop the monster into pieces. His blade did not stop, leaving bright traces. Soon the monster was torn into pieces. The protagonist looked at the strong aura of the guy who was angry. He said that it was incredible. Theseus killed the monster with one blow. The hero put away his sword and asked, Lee Hajuan knows what kind of creature this is? He replied that he had already met it a couple of times. But this monster is small. They had seen ones that reached several meters. Theseus thought, so in the future, such creatures may still appear there. The hero said he thinks they will have to retreat and come back when they come up with a plan. It is too dangerous to continue while they are inside the labyrinth. Suddenly everything around began to shake and tremble with terrible sounds. Lee Hajuan asked, is this an earthquake? But Theseus asked in a panic, this is terrible. Has it already begun? The protagonist did not understand what was starting, and Lucio told him to look ahead. The walls are moving. The ledges and walls really did move in different directions with a loud grinding sound. Parts of the walls flew right in front of them. Now Lee Hajuan understood why the labyrinth was devouring people. He screamed and asked Theseus what they should do. The hero answered that they did not have time to stand still. They needed to run away from there together as quickly as possible. The main character said that he would run now, but suddenly he felt something strange and stopped. It seemed to him that he saw a shadow. Right in front of him, a wall collapsed, separating him from the other half of the labyrinth. He grabbed the wall and began to call Theseus. He realized that they were separated, and the monster had been counting on this situation from the very beginning. Next to him was a small part of the melted monster. He turned around and was scared. Lucio asked what they should do now. He tiredly hit himself in the face with his palm and said that first they would find Theseus. Although it was a labyrinth, the paths should intersect, and not in one place. Theseus had already spoken when the walls began to move, which meant that if the walls had moved, there was a way out. As long as they had a chance to return, they had nothing to fear. The thread was still tied to his waist. Besides, he could still use the invisibility helmet and suit. On the contrary, if there was a problem, it was with Theseus. Not only did he hide the fact that the labyrinth was changing, he kept something else quiet. He was nervous, because the idea of a minotaur escaping from the labyrinth was complete nonsense. Lucio asked, wouldn't they move faster on a scooter? If that liquid creature appeared again, they could just crush it, right? He answered that he agreed with Lucio, but then the thread would break, and she sighed in disappointment, asking if they really had to walk so slowly until they found Theseus. He answered that they had no choice, they could only hope that they would meet him soon. At that moment they heard another loud and scary sound. He turned around in panic. Was that the sound of another rearrangement of the walls? The blows became faster. He grabbed Lucio and hid behind the wall, realizing that these were someone's steps, very heavy. He looked out from behind the wall, seeing how a hoof hit the ground with a roar. Only one creature can walk like that. Soon they saw a giant minotaur that passed by their wall. They began to panic and tremble with fear. Lee Hajuan said that he simply went crazy, just lost his mind. However, right in his face, the minotaur screamed and growled terribly. But still the main character remembered, they came specifically to catch this monster. He put on an invisibility helmet, deciding that in such a situation he would begin an attack on the minotaur. While the monster did not see him, Lee Hajuan quickly ran around the monster. The minotaur did not understand anything. Lee Hajuan thought that it was too dangerous and terrible. He ran and decided to do it as soon as possible. The steps in the dark corridor became faster and heavier, and then the monster punched the wall, destroying part of it. Stones flew apart, and the protagonist barely managed to dodge. Lucio got scared and asked her to spare him. Lee Hajuan did not understand. He activated the invisibility helmet, so why was that bull chasing him? Then the nymph screamed that it was because of the thread. The minotaur was chasing them along the thread. He said that she was right, and then decided to break the thread, after which Lucio began to bite off. She said that everything was ready. Lee Hajuan replied that she tried well. Now the monster could not chase them. However, the minotaur swung his weapon right above their heads and roared. He hit the floor of the labyrinth, destroying the walls, and when the dust began to dissipate, the monster looked at the empty corridor in surprise. Lee Hajuan hid behind the wall again. While the minotaur was roaring in anger, he couldn't find them. The protagonist was glad that they weren't caught. Although the monster didn't know where they were, he was swinging his axe too hard. He might accidentally cut off their heads. How could he get past? Then he looked closely at the minotaur's back. There was a fluid monster. Lee Hajuan decided to stop there, since it was too strange. Lucio also saw it and was horrified, asking if that wasn't the tentacle creature they met before? When the monster turned to face them, the creature quickly grew, raising its tentacles above the monster's head and surrounding it with a dark aura. The protagonist didn't understand what was going on at all, but Lucio guessed that the tentacle creature was controlling the minotaur. He thought about it, then Lucio asked if he didn't remember how the tentacles possessed the man at the Houndy Gate. Lee Hajuan realized that it was really so. Lucio was inspired, because if they pulled the tentacles out of the monster, like last time, they could win. He replied irritably that she imagined it too easy. How was she even suggesting to do that? The ground shook again. Lee Hajuan tensed up, and Lucio was very scared. He did not understand why the walls of the labyrinth were moving again. But then he thought that it could be useful if he slipped into the target. And when he looked up, he was shocked to see the king tied up on the ceiling. He almost lost consciousness and groaned. The protagonist was surprised. Why was he hung? Lucio screamed that King Minos was there. Then he realized that this was the king who had disappeared. He looked at the wall, realizing that everything had become more complicated. He did not think that he would meet the king in the midst of the fight with the minotaur. The invisibility helmet can only hide two people, that is, him and Lucio. He was still afraid of the scary-looking monster. Even if he saved the king, he would not be able to escape from the horned creature. He said he was sorry, but first Lee Hajuan himself had to escape. But he was surprised and nervous when the status panel appeared in front of him. The system said he had to save the king from the minotaur, and then listen to what the king had to say. He said with displeasure that the situation was terrible. Now he had to listen to this old king. Lucio asked again what he wanted to do. Did he really listen to the king? Was he planning to save the king? The protagonist answered, "That's right. It's unknown when this labyrinth will change again." The nymph asked admiringly, "Will he fight the minotaur then?" He waved his hand and said he wouldn't do it. He would just take the king to a safe place, and for now he had to distract the bull. However, Lucio said that this would be a fight with the monster, but if he attracted the monster's attention, who would save the king? He asked her to guess, and then said that it would be her. The nymph asked, displeased and confused, "What nonsense! How could Lucio save a man on her own if she was smaller than his leg?" He reminded her of how she boasted of being the tallest among the nymphs and laughed. Lucio frowned and screamed when they returned. She wanted to get a decent reward for her efforts, and Lee Hajuan laughed and agreed. He used the activation of the suit, which lit up brightly. The system reported that he had 3 minutes of suit action. He decided that he should try to do it, then pushed off and jumped up. Soon the chain was in his hands. He swung his sword and cut the chain, and when he came down with the king in his arms, he wanted to hand him over to Lucio. The nymph was nervous, but agreed, and at this time the Minotaur heard them and began to turn around. Lee Hajuan thought that he suspected it. The monster noticed them. He told Lucio to fly, and the nymph moved with difficulty. Carrying the king, she screamed that she was trying. But when she turned around, she was seized with horror, and she screamed in fear, because a huge Minotaur was running straight towards her, swinging an axe. The protagonist swung his weapon and told the Minotaur not to come near her, but to play with it. After that, he hit the monster with his club so hard that the Minotaur's head was flattened. However, Lee Hajuan's body trembled from the recoil. He thought, why did the monster have such a strong head? When he jumped down, the sparkling eyes of the evil monster were looking in his direction. The Minotaur began to make many attacks with his axe, constantly cutting the air with the blade, while Lee Hajuan dodged. He had a hard time dodging the sharp blade. What kind of creature was this that was swinging right at him? Although he was wearing an invisibility helmet, could it really be seen? But then he looked more closely. He saw a part of the liquid monster on his head with an eye directed at him. He realized that he was seen by the eyes of the tentacles. If so, then it seemed that these tentacles could see him even in an invisibility helmet. He dodged the blow again while he was thinking, and then clenched his teeth in displeasure. This is bad. He planned to distract the monster for a while and then escape. The aura around the Minotaur intensified and the monster began to roar again, attacking Lee Hajuan. He realized that he had no choice. He would have to kill the monster. However, he was scared when he jumped back from an axe that flew nearby. With each blow, the floor shattered into many stones. Lee Hajuan decided to take advantage of the fact that the monster's axe was stuck in the ground. While the Minotaur was roaring in displeasure, Lee Hajuan jumped high into the air and swung his club. With 100% of the force of the blow, he hit the Minotaur on the head, landing its head on the floor and flattening it. He screamed for the Minotaur to die, and after that, the monster really fell on its back, creating a huge crack. He proudly said that the monster might not like it, but its victims did not want to die either. Suddenly the tentacles grew bigger and the Minotaur jumped up from the floor. The protagonist couldn't believe that the monster had survived. The fluid monster grew bigger, tentacles even came out of the Minotaur's mouth. Lee Hajuan looked at the growing monster and couldn't believe it. Soon a giant creature came out of the Minotaur's mouth. It was a terrible eye in the mouth of fangs. The protagonist couldn't believe that there were so many of those creatures in the Minotaur all this time. He began to panic and realized that from the very beginning it was not he who controlled the Minotaur's body, but those tentacles. While he was standing, the tentacles surrounded him and quickly approached. They squeezed him tightly. Twisting into a common mass, he screamed to be let go. When the tentacles reached his helmet, he realized that those terrible creatures were trying to get into him. But he was surprised when he heard his name being called. Theseus shouted for Lee Hajuan to duck. He attacked the monster with a sword that seemed to glow. Theseus cut the monster's flesh with difficulty. His swings left huge blades of light, blinding and powerful. The monster began to scream in pain. It was as if he was burning and dissolving. Lee Hajuan fell to the floor, and soon Theseus landed next to him and asked if he was hurt. He was lying on the ground and could not believe it. How did the hero find them? He replied that he followed the thread that broke. It seems he got there in time. They saw that the monster's body began to deform and become even more terrible. Lee Hajuan was shocked. The tentacles and the Minotaur united? The monster screamed and hit the floor with an axe, destroying everything, but the guys managed to dodge. Lee Hajuan said that the Minotaur had become much faster, and Theseus replied that it was definitely not the Minotaur he had encountered before. Theseus told Lee Hajuan to escape from the labyrinth first. He had unraveled his thread. If he followed it, he would be able to escape. But the protagonist said that even Theseus could not handle the monster alone. They must get out together and call for help to win. Theseus said menacingly that he had planned to fight the monster himself from the very beginning, and Lee Hajuan was surprised and asked what kind of obsession with the Minotaur was this. Theseus said that it was because of the achievements. In their case, heroes who had achieved certain achievements could rise to the level of gods. And among these achievements, killing the Minotaur was a first-rank achievement. He confidently ran forward and said that he had already dealt with the monster once, and now he had the opportunity to become a god, but Lee Hajuan was still worried. Theseus still regretted the past. If he had become a god earlier, Ariadne, who abandoned him, everything would have been different. The protagonist was horrified, thinking that all the characters in mythology clearly have not quite reasonable thoughts. Why is he so determined to become a god? The system reported that the suit would work for another 25 seconds. He became nervous. The suit's action time was almost gone. But now the Minotaur is Theseus's problem. He looked at the thread. His task is to find out the truth from King Minos. He took the thread and decided that he had done enough. At this time, Theseus was already flying straight at the Minotaur's head, screaming and swinging his weapon. He swung his sword and cut the monster's flesh with his sword. But suddenly he tensed, realizing that his sword was wrapped in tentacles, and a huge eye of the monster was looking straight at him. He could not believe that his attack was reflected. The tentacles were approaching his face from several sides, but he managed to free himself and fall. The tentacles merged into one mass after the collision, and he landed on the floor, but saw that his sword was drowning in the liquid monster. The monster's tentacles hit from all sides, which makes it difficult for him to predict the trajectory of the attack. It is better to think through a strategy, and not just attack directly. He looked closely at the monster's legs and realized that he had found a solution. The terrible monster with a distorted face began to scream. Tentacles reached out to Theseus. The hero seemed to emit light and a bright flash. He used the speed of Athena, running away from the tentacles. His plan was to lead the tentacles behind him. He approached the monster, who swung his leg to kill him. The evil Minotaur kicked the floor. But he was surprised, since no one was there. Theseus had already run forward and was behind the monster. The Minotaur turned around with a crazy look and waved his hand for another blow. Theseus grinned and said that the monster shouldn't have turned around so quickly. He was completely tangled up on his two hooves. The monster began to fall, as his legs were tied by dark tentacles. When the huge body fell to the floor, there was a rumble and dust rose. Theseus' fists began to shine. He ran, preparing for the blow, and asked, "Did the Minotaur think that without a sword he could not attack?" The monster tensed up, and the hero said, "Thinking that he was weak is a mistake. His body is a weapon." He hit the monster with his fist. The monster flattened, and powerful energy was released from the fist, like a comet. A huge fiery explosion occurred in the labyrinth, illuminating everything, and then Theseus stood next to the burnt body of the monster, in whose head there was a huge hole. He said that the Minotaur was weak and stupid. He died twice because of something like that. He started to leave and told the Minotaur to finally calm down. However, he was horrified when the monster answered him and said, "This will never happen." He turned around and saw the Minotaur's corpse getting up, and a strange aura was burning around it. The liquid monster said, "It can't just let go of such a wonderful host." Something shapeless towered over Theseus, a creature with a terrible smile, which promised that it would torment his body until it became a torn rag. Theseus became nervous. The monster survived even after being hit with the power of Athena. What was in front of him? The giant hole began to heal, and the creature laughed. It does not know what it is. Inside the hole appeared a cocoon in which there was a beautiful girl. The monster asked, "What if he was Theseus' beloved Ariadne?" He screamed, "But how is it possible that Ariadne was there?" He looked at the girl in the cocoon and decided that he needed to calm down. It was a trap. Ariadne was now safe in the palace of Dionysus. The creature was laughing at him. He began to walk forward, right on the body of the fluid monster. He thought he knew where Ariadne was. He stretched out his hand forward. Although he was afraid, doubts that everything could be different did not leave him. Theseus stood in front of the girl and stretched out his hand to her. He almost cried and asked, "Ariadne, is it really her?" The girl without any emotion answered that she was glad to see Theseus, her love. She was so glad that she could meet him again. The hero stopped thinking completely and hugged her, saying, "This can't be. This is the real Ariadne in front of him." He will immediately pull her out of the body of that monster. The girl's face immediately became creepy. She smiled widely and laughed, thanking him. She turned into a dark monster, saying that Theseus himself came. The creature knew that people are very funny. It is enough to sow one seed of doubt, and they themselves destroy themselves. The fluid monster began to absorb the surprised Theseus, penetrating his mouth. The monster said, "No matter what, he is grateful." The creature needed a new body right now. It will happily use the body of the Greek hero. At this moment, Li Haojuan was riding his moped at full speed, thinking, "Who is this at all?" He grinned. Theseus said that by achieving achievements, you can become a god. He jumped on the moped right into the pond's trough, making a hole in it, and then caught Theseus from the clutches of the monster. They continued to drive away quickly, and Li Haojuan laughed loudly, saying, "In that case, this achievement will be his." So, Li Haojuan with a creepy face became the perfect fairy of the ending. He made a semicircle and stopped with the screeching tires, looking at the huge circle of monster remnants. One part of the creature opened an eye and groaned. It asked, "It seems that he escaped. Why did he come back again?" The protagonist approached and looked menacingly at the monster, saying that he was just a fool, and he did not escape. With a nervous and deceitful expression on his face, he said that it was a strategic retreat, but the monster knew that Lee Hajuin just escaped. However, the protagonist began to kick the remains of the monster and knead it. While the creature screamed, he said that he was now the winner, and the loser has no right to speak. Surprised, Theseus sat near the moped and said that it was incredible. He was able to kill the creature that the hero could not defeat even with the power of Athena. He realized that the rumors were true. A strong newcomer had appeared. Proudly Hajuin turned around and asked with a smile, "Is Mr. Theseus okay?" At this time, Lucio was alone with King Minos. She was nervous and asked when Lee Hajuin would come. Was he really fighting again? But soon she heard the sound of an engine and the light of headlights, joyfully calling him. He asked, had she waited for them for a long time? Lucio began to speak discontentedly. She was afraid that he was injured or killed. But the protagonist replied that he was not injured. She did not need to shout. On the way he met Mr. Theseus. They approached the king. Theseus asked, "What about the king? Is he okay?" Lucio thought about it and said that he was breathing, but still had not regained consciousness. What should they do? Wake him up? But Lee Hajuin suggested going back first. It seems that he does not have serious injuries. There is at least a doctor in the temple. He asked Mr. Theseus, "Can they do this?" The hero replied that it was possible. To be honest, he was not very happy with the king, but it would be easier for Lee Hajuin to complete his task. He remembered very old events, many warriors, a fire and the evil Minos. This old man attacked Athens, where Theseus' ancestors lived. And it was this king who sacrificed 14 people to the Minotaur every year. But all this was a long time ago. Enough time had passed for Theseus to forgive him. The main character said, "In that case, they will go now. Now it remains to hear the truth about everything that happened and receive a reward." They quickly rode along the path of the thread, and after a while they found themselves at Hephaestus's house. Despite this, the guy was unhappy that the road was too long. Lucio was worried and asked, "Is Lee Hajuin really going to the gods so easily?" Angry and irritated, Lee Hajuin said that there was nothing strange about it. This old blacksmith was terrible. The guy tried so hard and he didn't pay at all. Not long ago, the protagonist learned the truth from the king. King Minos sent offerings to Poseidon. There was a beautiful bull. But the tentacles were hiding in the animal's body, and then they burst out through the eye sockets and rushed to the sealed tomb inside the labyrinth. Soon, a strange hand crawled out of the tomb, and then the Minotaur burst out with a terrible roar. This disaster began with the Minotaur, or rather, with the fact that his body came to life. That monster with tentacles is to blame for everything. Now Lee Hajuin came to Hephaestus's house and asked if he was home. The protagonist could not understand what kind of monster it was. Why did it create trouble everywhere? Surprised, Hephaestus came out to them and asked, so he had already figured everything out. Lee Hajuin replied that he also learned all the details of what happened on the island of Crete. Cheerful Hephaestus said, "It's good that he asked Lee Hajuin about this, that they can't just stand there, he invites him to his place." The protagonist smiled and said that he would listen to the god. They sat down at the table and Hephaestus immediately became more serious. He said, "Well, that means the whole city was destroyed, and the protagonist even went to the labyrinth and killed the monster Minotaur, then saved King Minos?" Lee Hajuin smiled awkwardly. He originally planned to only save the hostages, but this is the result. And Lord Theseus helped. He only dealt the final blow. Admiring Hephaestus said that Lee Hajuin was great. First he defeated the sirens and giants, and now the Minotaur. He can already be considered a hero. He was very pleased. He glowed with joy, but said that he was not a hero. Lucio sighed. If he likes it, he can just say it. God said that the protagonist did a great job anyway. This task was half his initiative. They heard a knock on the door and Lee Hajuin asked, "Who came?" But Hephaestus said that he was no longer expecting guests. He asked to wait a little, as he would be back soon. He began to walk to the door, and when he opened it, he told the visitor that he already had a guest. If he needed anything, he asked to come later. But the guy smiled and told his brother Hephaestus that it was him, Hermes. The god was surprised to see a cute guy in front of him and asked, what was little Hermes doing there? The protagonist turned around and asked the god's name in surprise. Lucio asked, "Did Mr. Hermes come to them?" Hephaestus asked why the kid came, to visit or because of the thing he asked him to do, but it was still a long time before completion. But then he imagined the disgruntled girl with the beautiful nectar, and asked if Hebe had really sent him a package. The guy awkwardly rubbed his head and said that he came for another reason. Hephaestus asked in surprise, so he didn't come to see him? Hephaestus looked at the protagonist and sternly said his name, which surprised Lee Ha-juin. He said that his father was calling the boy, he needed to follow Hermes, after which the boy's eye flashed terribly. Soon they were on Olympus, near a beautiful and huge building. The system reported that he had arrived at his destination. The protagonist's moped stopped right next to the beautiful building. He asked, "Is this Olympus?" Lee Ha-juin was delighted. He had seen many tall buildings when he worked as a courier, but this building was too huge. He imagined a strict god on the throne. Inside the building sits the father of the Greek gods. Olympus is the home of Zeus. The nymph began to tremble with excitement and asked what they would do. Would Lucio also go inside? He replied that this was exactly it. They had worked together. Then the nymph screamed that this time everything was different. Zeus was there. He was the current ruler of Olympus, the greatest god who won the war against the Titans. In her mind, he was incredibly powerful, creating powerful lightning. Lee Ha-juin carried the panicking Lucio in his arms and said, "Even he knows this." But Hermes told him to take her with him too. She screamed, "Can't he just say that Lucio is sick?" He replied that he can't do that and laughed. When the guy got up, he tiredly asked why the stairs were so long. Hermes met them. He waved his hand and told them to go faster. They were already expected. The main character was greeted by Hermes, and the guy said that his father was not going to scold him. On the contrary, he wanted to praise him for his feats. They did not need to worry. Then Lucio became happy and joyful. They wanted to praise them? Hermes told them to get ready, and then opened the gate, from which a bright light poured. Lee Ha-juin was worried, but he was determined. He had to go. A stream of light poured out of the door. They saw Zeus on the throne in a shining hall. Lee Ha-juin covered it with his hand and asked what was this light. Why was it so bright? Lucio also closed her eyes and said that it was too bright. She was going to go blind. The protagonist realized that Zeus himself, the ruler of Olympus, was in front of him now. The light was so blinding that he couldn't even see it. Hermes said that he brought Lee Ha-juin to Lee's father, and Zeus thanked him and said that his son could go. He said that he would do so, and the protagonist was surprised that they would go to Zeus alone. Hermes said that only they were invited. Why should he come too? But then he remembered that he wanted to tell Lee Ha-juin something else. The guy had done a great job all this time. He had exceeded all of Hermes' expectations. Then the protagonist asked if it was really God who installed the delivery app for him. The guy laughed and said that it was exactly like that. He hoped that Lee Ha-juin would fulfill the next orders too. And he asked to hate that girl so much, no matter how she seemed at first. In fact, she is kind. Ha-shu asked that girl, he was talking about that thief, where did she get her kindness from? She was going to steal the treasures of the lizard people. Is that what kind people do? He can't understand the moral principles of the gods at all. Zeus asked, have they finally finished getting to know Hermes? Lee Ha-juin was surprised and ran to Hermes, saying that he apologized to Lord Zeus for the delay. But the god said that everything was fine, because today was the first time they met Hermes, so he would pretend not to notice. Zeus smirked and said that he had heard a lot about Lee Ha-juin. He helped Hercules find the harbingers of disaster, helped solve the problems that arose among the Norse gods, and even helped his clumsy successor? This job would be difficult even for those with divine blood. He really is incredible. Lucio looked displeased at the satisfied but awkward Lee Ha-juin, who thanked the god. The god also said that the nymph Lucio was with him. The little girl was very surprised and asked, did Lord Zeus say her name? She fell to her knees and said that it was a great honor for her, that is, for her entire family, a great honor for her stream. Zeus stood up and said they must be tired after recently returning from the island of Crete, so he would not detain them for too long. He called them to reward them. Lee Ha-juin was very happy about this. A reward from Zeus himself? Could he finally become an S-rank hunter? A sphere of lightning appeared in the palm of the god's hand. He said that this reward was prepared not only at the request of King Minos, but also to help him before the impending disaster. He can take it. Lee Ha-juin looked at the bright sphere and streams of aura in surprise, but when he took the object in his hands, he asked, is this a glass ball? Zeus replied, at first he thought of giving the protagonist the powers that others have, but he thinks this is more suitable. Lee Ha-juin became worried and asked, no, will this really be enough for him? Zeus laughed and said that he had many such spheres, but Lee Ha-juin began to cry from despair. No, this is bad. He also wants power, not a beautiful souvenir. Even Park Seongjin, under the patronage of Ares, is in third place in the ranking, if he received power from Zeus, how high could he rise? Would it be second place or even the strongest position? God said that this is where they will end. He will wait for their next meeting. When his palm shone over Lee Ha-jun's head, the guy asked if it was already over, and could he exchange the ball for money? But Zeus said that this cannot be done, he cannot even think about it, and now it is time for him to go back. A bright light filled the space. Lee Ha-jun's body sparkled, he felt as if he was about to be deformed. He cried and said why they were doing this to him, he just wants power. He quickly disappeared, and circles of light remained on the floor, like on water. Zeus began to laugh. He slapped his face with his palm. Because he couldn't believe the request to exchange the ball for money, Hermes really could find a funny guy. Suddenly he heard a voice. Lee Ha-jun looks like Zeus when he was a child. God saw the flame and asked how long has he been there, the sun god Ra? God replied that he has been there since Hermes brought that guy. Could that young guy be the man in the prophecy? Zeus said that it could be so, but so far he has acted as in the prophecy. God Ra is worried about whether Lee Ha-jun can bear this burden. A ruthless future awaits him. Zeus said that there is no other way, they cannot influence the law of causality, the person. Who can stop them? There is no one except that child, Lee Ha-jun. At this time, in the dark and eerie desert, there was a high tower. A secret meeting was held there. Strange creatures were present, men and women with bright eyes. The last participant, a guy with a heavy aura, came out to them. One of the participants asked, they were called at such a busy time, and the leader arrived later than the appointed time. Is that funny? The guy sat down and apologized, as suddenly everything did not go according to plan, he had some business to attend to. The girl chuckled and asked how it went. They had not waited that long, had they? In any case, it was time to get down to business. What kind of problem did their dear man have that he even decided to call this meeting? Sure, there were empty seats at the table, but the participants found the time to come because they were interested, right? The man said then he would announce why he called them. Recently the seeds that sprouted on the island of Crete disappeared. The girl asked, was it on the island of Crete? Was he talking about the seeds they sent out at the last meeting? The man replied that he had lost all contact with them. Apparently their body was damaged before they could spread properly. One of the participants frowned and asked, so what was the problem? The Minotaur would have attracted attention anyway. Then the guy said, the problem is not only that the creature is now dead, but who killed the seed sprouts. The member said, if they are talking about the island of Crete, then it could have been either Poseidon or Theseus. But the guy said that is not true, the seeds were killed by an ordinary person, he is not a hero of legends, but an ordinary person from the earth. The member spread his arms out and laughed, the leader thinks this can be believed? The guy said that the problem is not whether he believes him or not, because it really happened. The creature asked, now the leader wants to change their plan because of a certain person? But the guy said that he will not do that for anything, he wants them to know this. Even a small flap of wings that seems insignificant can one day return as a great typhoon. Well, this ends the meeting, they can each do their part. The lights were still on in Lee Ha-jun's apartment. He said that he had hoped for more when he learned that the ruler of the gods had summoned them. But he couldn't even imagine that Zeus would give him such a useless and small item. The system said that it was a ball with the spirit of Zeus. It gives immunity to lightning and bestows favor from all spirits. Still, he thinks it's a wonderful thing, right? Lucio asked what he was doing there. He still hasn't eaten the sphere. He replied that he was going to, and then swallowed the ball. He began to moan and tremble. Frightened Lucio asked what was wrong with him. Was there really something wrong with the ball? But he calmly said that it was very tasty and showed an approving gesture. And Lucio asked, did he really want to die? One fine day they came to the oceanarium. Lucio was happy and looked at the fish in the aquariums. She told Lee Ha-jun to take a look there. There are so many fish. He looked at the huge aquarium and said that this is natural for an oceanarium. Lucio kept running and saying that there were huge fish there, and he asked her to run slower, so as not to crash into anyone. He sighed. She recently asked him for a trip to the aquarium. It was last night. Lee Ha-jun was watching a program on TV. He thought it was funny. Then Lucio came up to him. She said that she had thought about it for a long time. And he said that she was blocking the screen. What did she want? Then she asked if he really forgot. That he promised to reward Lucio for his efforts on the island of Crete? He replied that he had already bought enough delicious food, even her face was shining with fat. But Lucio began to stamp her feet angrily, and said that this was not enough. He told her to stop, otherwise the neighbors downstairs would come. What did she want? She happily took the remote control and said that she wanted it. Fish appeared on the screen, and the nymph said that this was the aquarium, which had recently opened. She wanted to go there with Lee Hajuin. He thought that sometimes it was not bad to take a walk. Now Lucio was happy. Looking at the sea creatures, she was amazed by the variety of fish. She did not expect such a level. He was also amazed and said that the oceanarium deserves its popularity. The scale is really impressive. He saw a whale shark and was surprised that in reality the fish is even bigger. The huge mouth of the shark was right above Lee Hajuin's head. He began to worry. Where is this guy swimming so fast? Suddenly the shark began to hit the glass. He screamed, "What is going on?" Suddenly he noticed something scary. Why are all the fish moving towards them? Next to them was a girl who called her mother and said that there were fish there. He realized that this was bad. A crowd would gather there, and Lucio continued to look at the shark, fascinated, although she was very scared. She asked the fish, did they decide to scare everyone in the oceanarium? She ordered the fish to disperse quickly, then the shark turned around and swam away in displeasure. Lee Hajuin was surprised by her words, but she asked him not to worry. She scolded the fish, now they will not scare anyone. One of the children told their mother that the girl talked to the fish. The protagonist thought that everything was going badly. They were starting to attract attention. He took Lucio in his arms and said that it was time for them to leave, but she did not understand anything and asked why. He said displeasedly, it was strange that she did not understand how much attention she was attracting. The nymph was surprised that she stood out so much, and Lee Hajuin said, although her wings are not visible to others, if she behaves like this, they will know that she is a nymph. He imagined her on the operating table, crying, and next to her is a cruel and crazy researcher with a scalpel. In case of human interest, she can be harmed. Nymphs are very unusual, so they are interesting. There are many hunters in the world. Everyone has different abilities. They are thieves, fighters, magicians, and many others. It is said that some have the ability of psychometry, which allows them to see the past just by looking at a photo. People with psychometry use magic circles. If suddenly Lucio gets to the journalists, he cannot even imagine what will happen. The nymph began to panic and fear. What should they do now? Will they catch her now? He said that this will not happen for now. She just needs to be more careful. Lee Hajuin asked, by the way, what will they do next? Because she wanted to go there so much that she had already looked at everything. Doesn't she want to rest there for a while, and then look at everything again? They were standing near a huge hall with many spectator seats. Lucio said that everything was fine. She had already looked at enough fish. She pointed ahead and said that she wanted to go there. He looked at the huge pool and asked, did she want to go to the dolphinarium? Soon people began to fill the space and seats. The organizers addressed the esteemed visitors, saying that the show was about to begin, so they asked them to take their seats. Lucio enthusiastically said that she wanted to see a beluga whale, and Lee Hajuin asked, did she like them that much? She asked, did Lee Hajuin know that in the Middle Ages, belugas were mistaken for mermaids by fishermen? He imagined the face of a terrible siren and was surprised, displeasedly saying that after her words he felt so uncomfortable. She guessed that it was because of the sirens, in which case there was nothing to worry about, although they are similar in some ways. They are completely different species of creatures. Soon the organizers announced that the guests had been waiting for this for a long time, and finally the show was starting. They began to admire the pool, but Lee Hajuin immediately became nervous. He recognized the girl near the pool. Choi Seo-yeon said that this was their symbol and pride. The show of fantastic beluga whales was starting right now. He realized that it was Hermes' thief, and Lucio asked displeasedly, what was she doing there? He replied that he didn't know, maybe it was her main job? The guys next to them shouted loudly. They were happy to see her, and said that they had been waiting for this for a long time. Lee Hajuin didn't understand who these fools were and listened to them displeasedly and said that it was too much. The guys shouted that they loved Choi Seo-yeon. The girl took a cute pose and thanked them for coming. Today they would give them many new impressions. She wanted to continue talking, but was surprised when she looked at the audience. What was Lee Hajuin doing there? He waved and smiled evilly, and she thought that he was just a scoundrel. She became embarrassed and blushed. She didn't want this. She couldn't believe that he saw her like this. But then she realized that her usual suit was not much different from a swimsuit. The suit was almost as tight. The guys noticed that the girl was different today. Maybe she was feeling unwell? The girl asked, Choi Seo-yeon will not be performing today. When will the show continue? They came to watch the show. She was worried, but she understood that she had to perform. Suddenly a beluga whale swam up from behind and squeaked questioningly. The fish seemed to ask, are they going to perform or does she want to be fired? Choi Seoyun was surprised that the beluga whale was doing this, but then she decided that there was nothing she could do. She raised her hand up and said that the show was starting. She skillfully controlled the fish, like a conductor, and then swam with them, doing tricks and jumping out of the water. Choi Seoyun swam on the back of the fish and made an approving gesture and asked, she hoped they liked it? Lee Hajun and Lucio were delighted. He said that it was incredible, and the show also delighted the nymph. The guys cried with happiness, and shouted that they loved Choi Seoyun. Lucio was surprised that some were crying, but the protagonist said that it looked like tears of joy. The girl told the beluga to shoot a water cannon at those hooligans. The fish jumped out of the pool and directed a large stream of water at Lucio and Lee Hajun. She asked the audience to applaud the beluga for her excellent work. At this time, Lee Hajun and the nymph who were frozen were unhappy. They were sure that Choi Seoyun did it on purpose. After a while, she said that this was all the show they had prepared. Now they were asking the visitors to go to the exit. At this time, a ball of lightning was flying over the open area. Streams of magic and aura began to spread in different directions. The protagonist tensed up and felt something strange, and then everyone felt it. Lucio asked what was going on, to which he suggested the beginning of an earthquake. Choi Seoyun began to worry, thinking, where did the earthquake come from? She told the guests to head for the emergency exit as quickly as possible. However, everyone started to panic. They screamed and called for help, saying that they needed to run faster. Lee Hajun grabbed Lucio and said that they also needed to save themselves. Parts of the collapsing building were falling around them. But then he turned around, realizing that this giant accumulation of energy and lightning was the entrance to the dungeon. He found himself in a wet and dark cave. His head was hurting. He asked where this gate came from. But then he realized that the nymph was not nearby and began to call her, and also searched around. He was afraid that she was thrown to another place, but Lucio said in a trembling voice that she was nearby. It turned out that Lee Hajun was sitting on her. He said that she scared him, but why was she lying there? The nymph screamed in irritation that he was the one who crushed her. They saw strange tablets on the ground. Lucio picked one up and looked at it thoughtfully. He asked if she knew what it was. The nymph replied that she had definitely seen this writing before, but the stone was so badly damaged that she couldn't make out the text. She pointed in the direction and said that she was sure they needed to leave quickly. If such an artifact was so damaged, then the place was dangerous. The protagonist said that it was obvious. They were in danger while they were inside the gate, but they didn't need to worry. The gate opened not somewhere in the suburbs, but right in the center of Seoul. It was right in the aquarium, where a huge number of people had gathered. In 30 minutes at most, even less, the hunters would come to save the civilians. He pointed to a huge boulder and said that it would be a good idea for them to wait there until they were picked up. Besides, they could find other civilians trapped in the gate. Lucio was surprised. Was he just going to sit and wait? The protagonist felt something and they immediately hid behind a rock. Lucio asked, "What's wrong?" He replied that his internal danger radar worked. Soon they saw a girl who screamed and fell to the ground. Besides, she is a civilian. The girl's hands were tied. They said they apologize, but they do not know what kind of place it is. They went out for a walk and were unlucky to find themselves near the gate. A creature similar to a mermaid menacingly ordered the people to shut up. If the girl continues to make noise, he will immediately send them to the sea god. When other warriors appeared, the guy said that he found 2 more. He was praised for his good work and ordered to take him to the castle. Lee Hajun assumed that they were sirens, but Lucio replied that they were tritons. He did not understand what the difference was between them and sirens. Then the nymph said, although both are great sea warriors, only girls can be sirens, but mermaids have men too. These are the tritons. One of the guys called the captain and said that he found another broken tombstone. The man looked at the girls with displeasure, and they said that they knew nothing about it. They themselves had suffered. But the captain hit the ground with his staff and ordered them to be silent. They would take them to the castle, and then decide what to do with them. Lee Hajun watched the crying girls, and then said that they would go after them. The nymph asked, but didn't he say that if they just waited in shelter, the hunters would come and save them? He clenched his fists and said that was true, but that did not mean that they should just leave these people in trouble. Besides, because the gate opened in the oceanarium, children could also get in. He can't just sit and watch it. They started walking along the cave corridor, and soon they saw a bright light. Could this be the exit? Lee Hajun closed his eyes from the light, and then looked ahead in surprise. What was this? He was standing in the middle of nowhere, where there was only water and fish. Could he be dreaming? The nymph said that she understood everything. Lucio remembered where she saw the words on the stone. Once upon a time, among the regions, there was one where humanity flourished the most. The first civilization was born there, but this city was hated by the gods and destroyed. This is the underwater city of Atlantis. Li Hajuin didn't understand anything, but he knew that it was bad. How did he even end up there? Besides, aren't Atlantis and the dungeon different things? Lucio said that underwater valleys can be more dangerous than underwater depths. The Tritons didn't know who had broken the stone tablets, so they might have a more dangerous enemy. So what would they do, go back to the cave? He took out a magic bag and said, first they should try to get as deep as possible. He was glad he had taken everything with him. Soon they saw a huge city with equally large buildings. Inside the castle, the warrior was reporting to the captain, saying that he had done a great job. The captain asked if they had seen anything else strange in the direction of the city. The boys said that they hadn't seen anything, but they looked at the crowd of people and asked who they were. The sullen captain said that they were criminals. These earthly people were wandering around their cave. They didn't even have tails. The warrior asked if it was really them, but the man immediately answered in the negative. They were too weak to be those creatures, but for now they needed to be taken into custody, after which the subordinates obeyed the order. The crowd of people were taken further into the city. Lucio asked if he heard what they had just said. He replied that he had heard everything, fortunately, for now they were not going to do anything to the people. Lucio said that apparently the newts themselves did not understand what was happening. Would they be able to solve this problem if they talked to the newts? He thought about talking to them. He immediately remembered the lizards who fell to their knees in gratitude. Even with the lizards, they were able to resolve the problems peacefully, without fighting. But if the hunters and the newts were to clash there now, there would definitely be a lot of bloodshed in the end. He grabbed his head. This was just a nightmare. Not only did he need to somehow negotiate with them, but he also needed to resolve the misunderstanding before the hunters showed up. But then he thought maybe he should just let them fight. At that moment, he received a notification about a delivery order. He said that it was very inopportune, but his face was filled with amazement. Lucio asked what happened this time. Li Hajuin replied that everything had only become more interesting. With a grin he replied that they had an order from the king. The customer was the ruler of Atlantis. In the underground part of the castle there was a gloomy room. The captain threw the girls into the dungeon and said that everyone should be taken there. Soon the prison was filled with people who were very afraid. The boy began to cry and call for his mother. But at that moment, Choi Seoyun called the baby and asked him not to cry. She would definitely make sure that he was released. He was surprised because he recognized the girl from the aquarium. She smiled charmingly, but told him to be quiet. Choi Seoyun looked around suspiciously. She could not imagine that so many people would be imprisoned when the other hunters arrived. Judging by what happened before, these newts are trying to find the one who destroyed those tombstones in the cave. If she, the hunter of Hermes, can negotiate with the ruler of Atlantis, all the hostages will be able to get out of prison safely. She said that from now on, even if she disappears somewhere, the baby should not tell anyone about it, okay? He did not understand how she wanted to disappear. Then Choi Seoyun decided to show, and then stuck a bright thing out of her mouth. She said she always has a plan, and then she activated the spirit elixir.